Welcome to Wednesday Wisdom.
Good morning. This is Jos Visser, the author of Wednesday Wisdom. And this week's article is called Unhappy, the Team That Needs Heroes. By the way, this is a rewritten and extended version of a Wednesday Wisdom article that appeared on the 8th of March 2023 inside the walled garden of some intranet far, far away. People love toil and uphill battles, said no one ever. But despite the fact that nobody ever said that, the situation on the ground in many companies might easily lead you to believe that this statement is in fact true. In 2007, I was offered the opportunity to start a new team that was going to look after a service that was in dire straits. It was a popular service, very popular even, but its infrastructure was perennially on fire, with the pager ringing off the hook and people constantly fighting to keep the service up. At the same time, the software engineering team believed that the sources of their problems were external and that little could be done. Oh, if only we had dedicated machines instead of having to share our machines with other services. Or, oh, if only we had a private global file system cell instead of having to store our data in a shared cell that is also used by other services. Not being blessed with either dedicated machines or a private GFS cell, the team engaged in heroics instead to rescue the service from the brink of a meltdown multiple times per week. Some years later, I joined a super popular service where the weekly release and deployment was a right regular tour de force. Every Tuesday, a motley crew of engineers would gather in a specially reserved meeting room and start the process of releasing and deploying the latest and greatest code. This involved kicking off a build and fixing any build problems. When they finally had a package, the new code would be deployed to a handful of staging machines that received user traffic. People would then scour the logs and dashboards for errors and other anomalies. When they found some, note when, not if, they would track down the offending code, contact the software engineers who were to blame, and goad them into writing and merging a fix. Rinse and repeat until such time as they had a version that was mostly fine. Every week, that release process ran well into the wee hours with pizzas and beers shipped in to support the troops. One service that I've been involved in ran in many data centers, but one data center was the designated leader, which was where all the write operations happened. There was no process for transferring leadership to another data center because that was never needed. Until, of course, it was. When Hurricane Sandy threatened to flood the leader data center, a heroic effort by the most knowledgeable engineers on the service transferred leadership to another data center and the service was saved. An equally but slightly better planned heroic effort transferred leadership back once the hurricane had passed. Both during the emergency leadership switch and during the switchback, people worked through the night to make sure that the site stayed up and running. Many years and companies later, I joined a team that maintained a very complicated monolithic piece of software that sat at the center of the user visible control plane of our main service. Each day, dozens of people were merging changes into the codebase, so come time for a release, it was impossible to predict if the whole thing would work or not. Fortunately, there were tests. Unfortunately, the tests were mostly useless. If the tests passed, that didn't mean that the code worked. If the test failed, that didn't mean that the code was broken. To shepherd the release process, we had a release czar rotation, and it was the release czar's job to harass all the people who had changes in the upcoming release to either fix their tests or declare that the code was fine even though the test failed. There was considerable reluctance on the side of the developers to fix the tests, and there was an equal amount of reluctance to vouch for the code in absence of a passing test. It was expected that the release czar harassed everyone continuously to get the approvals in and to guide the release and deployment. It was a terrible job. It was a hero's job. Once, I joined the SRE team of a popular website that we had acquired. One of the components of the site was an API server that gave access to the internal data store. Every now and then, the API server would crash because of an unreasonable amount of requests. Whenever that happened, some ops hero would track down the root cause. More often than not, it would turn out to be some batch job that sent a flood of requests to the API server, because, well, why not? The ops hero would locate and contact the owners of the batch job and get them to lower the request rate by either reducing the number of workers or stopping the job entirely. The first time this happened during my on-call shift, I asked people, what's going on here? We have perfectly fine server-side rate limiting technology. Why are we not using that? The answer turned out to be a mix of ignorance, perceived lack of time, and caring. People didn't know this was possible, didn't have time to do it, and didn't care to make the changes required to link in the rate limiting libraries, figure out what reasonable rate limits would be for the various types of clients, and set up the required configurations. Apparently, it was easier to just deal with the outages than it was to put in the work to deal with this class of problems once and for all. Heroics are exciting, and most people seem to be of the opinion that it's better to have an exciting job than a boring one. Better, apparently, to be the hero who regularly saves the day than to be the engineer who does a bunch of boring work, thereby solving problems before they blow up. Because where's the fun in running complicated services if there are no car chases and explosions? We gotta have car chases and explosions, because otherwise, how are you gonna recognize the heroes? The problem with heroism is that it is addictive. Heroes get praise, heroes are valued, heroes save the day. Praise the heroes for their efforts, and before you know it, you have a bunch of self-important dopamine junkies who have become incapable of doing the slow and methodical work that does away with the need for heroics. That this is not just my observation might be obvious from a reaction to a recent Wednesday Wisdom article, where a reader complained that there aren't enough incentives for people to spend time to actually improve the code quality via proactive reviews. People rather become rock stars by fixing buggy code in production than catching it in creditless code review. The problem with heroes is that heroics don't scale. Instead, boring scales. Call me old-fashioned or boring, but when I'm in charge of running some service, I want my days to be uneventful. The last thing I want to do is run a site that constantly needs a couple of wizards on call to deal with things that are completely foreseeable but that the site's designers didn't take into account and have no plans for. None of the problems that I described in the anecdotes in this article are beyond solid engineering. It might not be flashy, it might not be attention-drawing, but these are all solvable problems. Indeed, all of the problems I described in these anecdotes were eventually solved by good old-fashioned engineering. Slow, methodical, but solid work that significantly improved the services and everyone's lives in the process. To paraphrase Bertolt Brecht, unhappy the team that needs heroes. The heroes might think that they need to be there to deal with unforeseeable circumstances, but in fact, a need for heroes usually indicates a badly designed and badly implemented system.